Hare Krishna, everyone. Good morning and a very happy Sunday to you. My name is Gopigita Shomakar, and I'm the Vice Principal of TKG Academy, the very first school established by Srila Prabhupada. And we welcome you to the Children at Home show on the GBC Strategic Planning Team page, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. Please do hit share and comment and like so that the word can be spread. Today we have a very amazing guest on this show. Her name is Her Grace Arudha Mataji. Thank you so much for joining us, Arudha Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Nice
So,
to
yes.
hear.
So Arudha Mataji is very well known, widely renowned author, mother, teacher, and preacher in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And she's been lately, and even more than before, I can see, doing many seminars and workshops online, not only for children, but for parents and teachers all over the world. And we're really, really grateful to have you here with us, Mother Arudha. I'd love to hear you tell us more about who you are and what your life story has been, so that those who have joined, can kind of really delve into your goal, your life's goals, and how you've been accomplishing them. I will say, Arudha Mataji, that when I first had my young boy, my first boy, I remember the day he was 2 weeks old, and I had heard the incredible story of how you raised your two sons with Srimad Bhagavatam, and how they became so academically capable, spiritually and academically successful, that they were graduating from college with master's degrees, I believe, before they were 20. So we'd love to hear more about your journey. Perhaps you can start us off with your background. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gopi Gita. Thank you so much for your, for your kind words. I came to this country in 1977 after I got married. My husband was already here in America 10 years prior to me. He had come right after high school to do higher studies. And so my introduction to Krishna Consciousness was in this country. And my husband, he got a book, Bhagavad Gita, at an airport, a San Diego airport, in 1966. And he kept it in his bookshelf. And for at least 10 years, he was a very, very religious person, and he was a bhakt of Lord Ram. So he was thinking, well, one day I'm going to read this, but he didn't really pick it up. And so after I got married and I was pregnant with my first son, I happened to pick that book and started reading. I had been searching prior to that, looking for deeper meaning of life, even though we grew up in a fairly religious family. But yet I was looking for a deeper meaning to life, and so I Krishna's mercy, and I picked up that book, and I started reading the Bhagavad Gita, and I was very, very moved. Just prior to that, I was reading a couple other Gitas because, like I said, I was searching, and not feeling totally satisfied till I read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. And I remember the time when I could not stop reading for a whole week, getting, reading as much as possible. And remember that feeling, that devotional feeling that I was getting from reading that book. And that was my first introduction to Krishna Consciousness. And then we both started looking for a temple close by, and we were in Chicago. The temple in Rogers Park was an hour away. And so we both drove there, and I started, and this was my first exposure to an ISKCON temple. And there was a devotee who took me under his, shelter, and I started talking to him, and he actually, helped me in many different ways and preaching to me. And I started doing some seva there in the kitchen. And that was my first. And then I started reading more books. My husband became exposed to Srila Prabhupada Lilamrit at that time. He was very moved by that. So then my children came, and and then when my children turned, I started practicing bit by bit, and Krishna Consciousness, started chanting. And then when I was the time when I found this Bhagavad Gita was when the time when I was pregnant. So I was ready. I wanted to practice this way of life. And so when my children turned of school age, both my husband and myself started thinking of their education. And like other parents, we were thinking, well, our option would be either a private school or a public school. And we opted for a private school, thinking that this would be the best way. It'll be more safer, better education, better values.
Mm.
And so I enrolled my oldest son in this private school. But I wanted to find out how they taught in the school. And so I started volunteering at a time there. And within like 2 years that they were there, I found many things that I was very dissatisfied with. And there were things like both academically and spiritually. Like academically, I found it lacking because I sat in a math class, and my oldest son Radhika Raman, he finished his work like about 20 minutes early, and he was sitting there bored. And then while the teacher was coping with the other children, so I realized that how public schools are really meant for the average. If you are above average, you're not challenged, and if you're below average, you're basically frustrated. So, and then on the spiritual value platform, I found a lot of things that I was not very happy with. My younger son Gopal Hari, one time he came and told me how the teacher boyfriend would come in class, and sometimes they would openly kiss in front of the children.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So and then of course he told me how they were teasing him, and about his shikha and about the lunch that I packed him, and the teacher would not do anything about it. So and he was mortified. Another time, yeah. So one time Gopal Hari, huh?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Another time, Gopal Hari came and said that they didn't do any academics that day because the whole day the teacher was so upset that she talked about, how to behave well, because one child was so misbehaved. She was, so upset. So I realized how much academic time was wasted. How good character, behavior really comes when we, put God in the center, right? Because through Krishna and his devotees, we learn the values of life. And generally, public schools are secular institutions where any talk of God is not allowed. So in this way, I was dissatisfied, and mainly I was dissatisfied because I was thinking that when they came back from school, I could teach them, Krishna conscious things. I had a great desire to teach them, how to play harmonium and read with them, Krishna book and Srimad Bhagavatam. But I realized when they came home after 6 to 7 hours of school, they were not in any frame of mind to sit and do these things. They were not in a devotional frame of mind, and it was so much of an effort to try to, take them away from that consciousness and bring them down to the devotional consciousness. It was a very difficult situation.
So this is just so incredible, because if you think about what attracted you personally to Krishna consciousness, it was Srila Prabhupada's books. And you developed such a taste for Bhagavad Gita that you said that you didn't want to put it down. You were reading and reading, and even you were pregnant with your son. And so, our children are brought to us by the Lord specifically because the Lord knows what child needs to be matched with what parent. And you're reading, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and your son has come into your womb because he also wants to develop that consciousness. Those of us who are bhakti parents, we have such a great responsibility to keep our children in Krishna consciousness because they are making that choice, and the Lord is fulfilling their heartfelt desire to be born in a Vaishnava family. And so we forget this sometimes in, raising our children. We may not realize that it's a very purposeful arrangement that the child has been brought to the mother's home, and you're reading Srimad Bhagavatam while your children were in the stomach, in your womb. And I remember my Pitaji did the same thing for both me and my sister. And I remember it because one of the first memories I have is of my mother pregnant and sitting up against a wall with pillows all around her, and my dad, and I remember the gold book cover. It's a very early memory. And my mother was trying to understand, was that a memory from when my sister was in her stomach or when I was in her stomach? And she said that when I was in her stomach, Pidaji used to read out loud to her 5 to 6 hours every day. And he used to make her sit and hear it because he had heard from Prahlad Maharaj in the story of Gayadhu that you're supposed to read. Of course, in those days, a lot of devotees in ISKCON were quite fanatic. And so my father was definitely one of those devotees, and he used to make my mother sit and listen. And I remember the gold cover and the red light lettering. Very vividly, it was one of my earliest memories. And so that you did this with your son, with Radhaguru Manprabhu, that you were reading Srila Prabhupada's books, and that, naturally he had that inclination from a previous life, as all of our children do who are born in bhakti families. And so then you noticed all of these challenges. So these children have been brought to your home, and now they're in the public school, and you're seeing, okay, hold on a minute, this is completely contrary to what academically and spiritually, what I want my child to do. And Arudha Mataji, I love how you have mentioned, and I just wanted to shout out to all the viewers. We have quite a few here with us today. Thank you for joining Dhruva Maharaj Das, Sangyan Reina, Sanjay Kumar, and yes, thank you. Please do comment any questions you may have. We have the guru of homeschooling in ISKCON with us today, Arudha Mataji, and we are talking about Srimad Bhagavatam. And so because it is actually, I needed to also mention that as my service as regional secretary for the Ministry of Education, this week we are celebrating Shravanam Week, where all over the world we're encouraging devotees to pick up Srimad Bhagavatam and read it every day and make a commitment to Srimad Bhagavatam. So Arudha Mataji is like literally a very, very incredible example of someone who does this with children, not only with her own children, but with so many around the world. And so you're saying that then when they were in public school, not only spiritually were they not interested or attracted, but the whole purpose of us putting our kids in school is so they can thrive academically. But you were finding that they were bored. And I love that point that you made, that, the public school systems and even private school systems in America and mostly around the world, you have a cookie cutter type of curriculum that you have to offer to every single child. It has to follow this cookie cutter system. And that's established because the Industrial Revolution, during that time, everyone came from the farms and the small towns to the cities, and they started making these large public school institutions, PS1 and PS2, because all the parents were working in the factories, and they had to standardize everything. And so you've got, rows and rows of children taking the same test, learning the same thing. Of course, different private schools and public schools try to do this in different ways, attend to learning styles with centers and this and that. They're working on it. But children who are going to fall behind, who are not going to fit in that cookie cutter, or children who are bored, they're going to struggle in this, and they're not going to feel challenged. They're not going to feel good enough. They're going to have to go through a lot of rote work of wasting time. And we're just right now working on COVID, Arudha Mataji, for our Gurukul, for our school, and identifying just to get in the social distancing lines to wash your hands. There are strict procedures to how much you have to wash your hands. We have small classes, but for a class that's a lot larger, just the line itself, to stand and wait in a line to go wash your hands, would be 40 to 45 minutes long. And a lot of times, of course, it's a little drastic because of COVID, but a lot of times kids are given busy work, just worksheets that have no don't increase the internal motivation because of this very thing you're saying, because children will finish at different levels at different times. And you identified at a very young age that your child, who you automatically saw as a bright, brilliant young boy, that he was bored and not feeling challenged. And I feel like a bored kid and a child who's not challenged, that is the biggest detriment to a child's life, is that they go through like incredible feeling of frustration because they can't do what they're meant to do. And so, yes, thank you for sharing. So Please continue. So you have these challenges, the teachers kissing her boyfriend in the middle of the school. It's extremely unprofessional. But yes, and your children who are having to watch this is their mentor, this is their teacher, this is their guru. Like it's I can understand the frustration. So many of our children are faced with this frustration every single day. So how did you deal with this? What did you do?
Well, I started looking for alternative ways of education for them. At that time, homeschooling was not well known in ISKCON, but quite well known in America. As you know, in America, homeschooling is quite popular. And so I wanted to try it out. And, there were many companies here. There are many companies here in America who will sell a parent a whole year's curriculum for a certain price. And then one can, follow those lesson plans and go through, daily lesson plans. And so in this way, I got a curriculum for them, for the whole year. And I thought, well, let me try this homeschooling for in the summer. And if it works, then they can continue. Otherwise, we will have no alternative except to put them back in school. Because I was very nervous. Needless to say, like any parent, I was very nervous.
So you were really innovative, because it was prominent in America, but even at that time, it wasn't as prominent as it is now. It was mainly the Christian groups. This is the early 80s, right? And so the fact that you were ready, as an Indian immigrant, I will say, Mataji, that you were okay to think out of the box, to not just follow mindlessly, blind following what everybody else is doing, and to really identify that this is a challenge, this is a problem. I don't want to have my child go through this, because you were also it shows that you were also very firmly convinced in the Krishna conscious philosophy, that you were able to say, okay, let's figure out something else. Let's figure out another way because this isn't working.
Yes, I was a new devotee, so I was really inspired by what Prabhupada has given us and the books and everything. So I had a great desire to teach them those the Shastra and practical devotional services. So in order to fulfill those desires, I realized that I have to keep them at home, and this is where it started. I was quite convinced, even though I was such a neophyte, but yet in my heart I was convinced that in order to give them this life, I have to teach them a different way. And so when I ordered that curriculum, it was amazing that in 3 months I was able to finish the entire year's curriculum.
Wow! Oh my goodness!
It was not it was not difficult at all, and they were studying like 2 hours a day. Most of the time, we were busy because we had a preaching center, and there were so many things to do, so many festivals and so many programs. My husband was really out in there, like he loved to keep us busy with different programs, and so we participated in all of them. So then I got the confidence. Well, this is not very difficult, to homeschool. And when children are young, anybody can teach them. One doesn't require high school, even high school, because it's so elementary what we need to teach them. And, and then I started thinking that, well, if the other thing is when we buy a curriculum, then we are stuck with the books that they send you.
Yes.
So, like in math or in English, if they are, they are in a higher grade, then you're stuck with those books. So I knew that I could not follow this program. So I would have to buy different books at different levels for them, depending where they were at. So I thought, why not just do it on my own? Why not do it for Srila Prabhupada's books? Teach them language arts through those books, and then keep a math book. And so in this way, I started teaching them through Srimad Bhagavatam. And
so around what year was this?
okay, so 1982, yeah, it would be 84. I would say 1984.
Okay, because I remember, so we were in Gurukul at that time, in Mother Urmila's Gurukul in Detroit in 1984, and I remember you had come to visit. My father was temple president in the Potomac Temple, and I remember you had come to visit then, and by then, I don't remember at that time if Ravi Gupta, Radhika Raman, was already writing his articles. He's a little younger than me, but we had heard about, there was already like talk among the different devotees that you had begun homeschooling your children with Srimad Bhagavatam. And I do remember I might have been 13 or 14 and meeting you in Washington, D.C., Potomac. And I remember the way that my father had introduced you was something about how much stress you had placed on Srimad Bhagavatam, if I'm remembering correctly. And I remember him coming home and telling me, look, Gopi, like you can do this. There are other kids that are doing this. That are, because I loved Srimad Bhagavatam. It was something we did as a family. Regularly, we read Srimad Bhagavatam. And Pidaji would sing the verses every morning. He would take 45 minutes after his japa and sing all the verses. And so I just memorized them just by hearing it. And that faith and that love, you know, the relishing, you get the relishing feeling of Srimad Bhagavatam. And so I remember thinking then that I wanted to do what you were doing with my own children. And so then later on, Radhika Raman Prabhu, he was Ravi Gupta, and all the kids all across ISKCON knew that there was this one boy who was writing articles for BTG. And, you know, kids can be pretty judgmental. And some would be like, oh, yeah, his mom probably writes these articles for him. And, oh, yeah, that's just a homeschooled kid. You know, the group of kids would talk. And because, you know, little kids, they tend to be competitive, you know, oh, who's this boy and why are his articles going up in Bhakti Godhead? Everybody wants their articles to go in Bhakti Godhead. But I remember reading those and I remember being so impressed with the way he presented Krishna conscious philosophy, that he was so young. And so you said that I just wanted to share that, you know, I apologize for interrupting you, but I remember at that time, the journey because we were also young in Krishna consciousness and we were watching. And I know a lot of families were watching your family as to how is this going to work out? Because most of the kids were either in Gurukul or in public and private schools. There were not, like you said, very many Hare Krishna homeschoolers at that time. And we had decided to, because my sister and I went to public school for 2 years. My parents didn't like it. Mother Urmila came and told my parents, this was when my father was temple president in Potomac in Washington, D.C. There was no Gurukul there. Since before then, we were always in Gurukul. And they pulled us out, and my mother Urmila had to convince my parents, I remember, that you can do the homeschooling, and look, Arudha Mataji is doing it. And so then we started homeschooling for a few years, and then from there went to high school again in Gurukul. But so now you've decided you're going to do it. Another point you're making here, which is just so powerful, Arudha Mataji, is that the curriculum, the objectives that a child needs to learn in their year 1, year 2, year 5, those objectives can be learned very quickly and very easily. And those of us who are teachers, we say during COVID, like just during COVID, this is also becoming so apparent in all over the education society, that school doesn't require 8 hours of being at the desk. Schools need to be so much more engaging to the children, because the actual curriculum, especially if you have a one-to-one individualized lesson like homeschooling or like one of the gurukuls that we have now, the children learn it so fast. And it's so much of their time is being wasted in these standardized environments. There's the key moments of your entire 80, 90 years of your life are being developed in your childhood. Who you are, what your identity is, what your strengths are, what your purpose is, your internal confidence. There's such little time in the first 18 years of life or the first 14 years of life. And if the majority of that time is being spent just going through like rat race wheel of just having to fit into society's expectations of sit at your desk, follow the line, do what everybody else is doing, it's such a waste of their childhood. And so you had finished up 3 months, in 3 months, the entire year's curriculum. And it's not that, I don't believe that only it's because your children were exceptionally more bright than everyone else. Sure, there was definitely some brightness there that is, above average, but so many children can do this. I believe that it was your conviction and your experience that you were seeing, oh, wait a minute, your ability to think out of the box, to push yourself to take that risk of like becoming on the forefront of education and homeschooling. And so once you decided that, so you saw that there was a discrepancy here, that you could do 3 months in one year worth of curriculum in 3 months. And then you were saying that you realized that the reading and all that, like you could do that through Srimad Bhagavatam. So how did you do that? We're getting to the heart, the essence of this story. How did you do that?
Well, our program daily was that we got up in the morning and we did a morning program, and then we studied Srimad Bhagavatam for like 2 to 3 hours. Now, this kind of study was not like a study where children were not allowed to get up, or they would take frequent breaks, but we would sit down again and do it. And basically, what we were doing is sitting in a circle and just simply reading, taking turns reading the translations and opening it for discussion. And one point would lead to another point, and another point would lead to more points. And very soon we realized that we were going into many, many areas, of discussion. Like, we were covering our own life, problems, that we face. Overall, we had a community, a devotee community, the problems that we were facing within the community, and the problems at large, in the world that we saw. And and then we were covering topics of history, practically every subject matter. And that kept the children very, very interested, because the children were allowed to expand. Like you mentioned about the tutorial system, how powerful it is, this form of discussion, which is very, very can be done in a homeschooling environment, because there's ample opportunities. For example, in Cambridge and Oxford, they have this tutorial system, and with one or two students with one teacher, and it's very, very successful. For example, in Srimad Bhagavatam, we see the entire Bhagavatam was a discussion between the sages and Sutta Goswami. So this, like you said, it creates it expands the children's mind. They become more creative, and they get a chance to express. It's not just a one-way thing. It's not a one-way download where the teacher is speaking and the child is simply listening. So, like you mentioned, the motivation has to be there. And what I noticed after a few years of doing this, everything was going very well, academically and spiritually. And after we would do this discussion, and I would have some time for writing, generally their writing came a lot later. They were not initially inclined to write. So mostly it was through discussion. I noticed their speech, their vocabulary was getting better. I was teaching their vocabulary words through words in Srimad Bhagavatam, putting them in context. And I noticed how enthusiastically they would learn words like that. But if I were to give them 5 words, it was a big chore to try to figure it out. But if I did it in context, they were very happy. So again, I noticed how language was a lot easier to teach through Srimad Bhagavatam. And then, but I gave them some writing work as well afterwards. And then we were ready to do some practical things. The children were ready to stretch out, and we would go out and we'd do different programs. I would plan ahead of time. I would look at the city calendar and see all the things that were going on in the city, and get permission ahead of time, and we would participate. And the children, we would put out book tables, prasadam tables. We'd go out and do school programs and present Krishna conscious philosophy in the schools. So in this way, we would reach out. These were the outreach programs, and most of the day we were busy with that. And then we'd come home, and then the children would sit down with some math in the afternoon, and we had some music, some memorization. So my homeschooling was based on the 5 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, rote, and raga, we call it.
Oh, wow. Reading, writing, arithmetic, rote, like memorization, and raga, which is music. I love it. It sounds so beautiful. I love the 5 R's. So we have here just a comment from Radhanath Dasi. Thank you so much for joining. Such an enlightening session. She's saying, we experience so many bored children in the current system. We're now having an increased dependency on Ritalin to help the child cope. Thank you for this session. And we have quite a few questions have come in now. 3 questions have come in. Thank you so much for your questions. We will be answering your questions towards the end of the segment. They're very important, and please stay with us until the end so that Arudha Mataji can answer your questions. So to recap, There's so many gems of wisdom here that you're sharing. And what's so incredible to me, Aruna Mataji, is that you did this through experience. You know, like you tried it out. At every step you were figuring it out, you were trying it out. And you had so much faith in Srimad Bhagavatam to carry you through it. And the first thing you mentioned was how you sat in a circle and you read and you discussed. And that's the Socratic method, allowing children to read and talk and share their own thoughts, bringing it so that it becomes relevant to them. You said it became about discussion of our own issues in life, about our, how to manage our problems, how to navigate it. Because Srimad Bhagavatam, some may think that it's so not relevant. It's like from 5,000 or 20,000 or a million years ago, like sages, and what does this have to do with me today in America, contemporary modern society? But when you sit with your children or even with yourself and you read it in a discussing format, all of the heart of the issues that appear in every single chapter are extremely relevant to what happens to us every day in the way that we interact with people in our relationships. And so you get a chance to explore that with your boys, with your children. And I'm lucky that my husband, he was also raised in a Gurukul system and Hare Krishna system, and he's so good at this. We read regularly with our children, and we do the same thing where we just sit, each of us reads the translation, and we talk. And it's not a rigid, like, oh, I have a tendency to be a little more rigid, but my husband has been very like, allow them to discuss this. Even if it comes into something that has nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, let them discuss it, let them talk about it, and then we'll come back to the verse. It shouldn't be just, oh, be quiet and read and don't talk and don't discuss. Allow them to explore it and laugh and joke. And there's so much humor. You can tell when we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam, the natural like happiness comes in your heart, and the entire environment is brightened. And so that was the first thing you were saying, was the discussion, that you allow them to talk about it and they discuss it. And the second thing you were saying was about the vocabulary, grammar, spelling, vocabulary, sentence structure, reading comprehension. These are the 5 things, and then there's writing. 5 key areas that your child will be tested on in America on the ITBS. Spelling, vocabulary, or on the SATs, or on the PSATs, on the CAT test or Stanford test, or whatever nationalized testing system, the STAR test, according to your state, you're looking into, that you want to make sure your kid is following the benchmarks. They're going to be tested on these areas. And if you have your child reading such a high level text as Srimad Bhagavatam from young age, now they have texts that are matched to the level of the child. And a lot of people think that they have to stick with that level. You can't read a text that's higher because the words are too difficult. And so they put a box over their child's abilities. But if a child is a basic reader, a child can, as a basic reader, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, start delving into Srila Prabhupada's books. And that's what we do at TKG Academy. We introduce Bhagavad Gita, we introduce Krishna book, Prabhupada Lilamrita, and their vocabulary increases, their spelling, because they're learning it, and it's destroying avidya on so many different levels. And so you recognize that and you identified that. That was so important. And then I love this thing you're saying about outreach programs. How you went, and this is an area I need to do a little more with my boys. We're all a little introverted, but to go and be into outreach. And so to set up the tables, and that's where they get their socialization. They're getting their socialization as experts of Krishna consciousness. And that is such a big boost to their identity as children, that I am a servant of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada, and I can help Srila Prabhupada in giving this information to others. And then they're interacting with those who may not be Bhakti followers. Instead of creating an us and them vibe, they're learning how to talk, learning how to interact, learning how to be kind and relate and compassionate. And so beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. So, we a lot of us think that schooling means sitting behind a desk, isn't it, for 6 hours a day? And it's like a sentence, unless a child sits behind a desk for that many hours, he cannot be schooled. But actually, we have to realize that real schooling happens, a lot of it outside the home, right? And this is what I noticed as my children were being exposed to things out there. but in a protected way. They were able to be, they learned so many things that they weren't able to actually would be able to do it just through books. Are we disconnected here? Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
I'm so sorry, my computer just crashed. Please continue. I'm just resetting it up. Please
Okay.
continue.
Yes, I wasn't sure. Okay. So, in this way, if anybody, my children, if you ask them that if they remember what they remember about homeschooling, and what they can remember are those fun activities, Krishna conscious activities of daily, programs and our efforts to give Krishna consciousness to others, our own festivals in our center, and the dramas. So this is what we remember about homeschooling. So, like you said, Gopi Gita, it's a very important part. I mean, this outreach programs for our children, because they get a sense of not, they get a sense of the outside world in a way that is very, very positive. They develop compassion. The problem with a lot of people feel that a lot of the problem with homeschooling is that children feel isolated. Well, not. Really, they don't. If you do it, if you actually expose them to the outside world in this way. Prabhupada gave us, a whole world of where if we were to follow all his, suggestions and his instructions, there's nothing lacking in Krishna consciousness. And so this was our experience, which is very, very enjoyable for our children, but as well as a good education. When the children got a little bit older, then we also went for prison programs. And that was a real amazing experience for them because they realized, what it is like to be on the other side. And one thing for certain is that they knew that this is something that they didn't ever want to get into. So in this way, but they could also develop compassion for people who were in the prison and how Lord Chaitanya's mercy can be given in places like that. So in this way, we went through the whole homeschooling, and it was very, very enjoyable. In fact, today when I'm not homeschooling my children, that's one thing I really miss is this time when we were homeschooling together. But then I'm happy to now I've been sharing this methodology with others out there in the world, and what I noticed is that anybody who's trying to experiment with teaching Srimad Bhagavatam to their children, following a nice Krishna conscious lifestyle, they've had wonderful results. I know many, many families who have experienced the same results as we have done that. So this is universal. The Prabhupada, the formula that he gave us, it applies to anyone, and one can adjust according to their time, place, and circumstance.
Yes, so thank you for continuing. And it's just, I missed a few of the things that you were saying, but I'm glad everybody's here. My computer just crashed. My apologies. This is universal, you were saying, and that everybody can apply these principles to Srimad Bhagavatam, to teaching your children with Srimad Bhagavatam. And so you were talking about the outreach, and then if you just can catch me up for a minute as to what you were saying, because I'd love to respond. Again, I feel like almost every single one of your sentences are so powerful, and they energize me as well.
Well, I was talking about how it's so important to expose our children to the outside world,
Ah,
because we shouldn't think of homeschooling as a years of isolation when children are kind of sentenced to home behind a desk, and overambitious parents are trying to cram them up with academics. No, homeschooling is meant to give our children a carefree life. You know what childhood is meant to be. You know, a childhood, Prabhupada said, is meant to be a time where children play. You know, they are engaged in Krishna conscious games and feasting and dressing and dramas. This is what childhood is supposed to be, right? And so we should not deny them that life. And the way to do it is, and we don't realize how much education is going on during that time. Traditionally we think education means to be studying from books, but real education really happens out there, you know.
yes, in the outside world, and as they're getting exposed and as they're being a part of the, it's like this whole point, this whole concept of making sure that our children are not insulated, making sure that they don't know how to relate. They need to know how to relate to others, how to talk to others, just have healthy social dynamics. And in doing that in a Krishna conscious setting creates so much more internal confidence in themselves.
Mhm. Their
Yeah.
identity as devotees, their faith in Krishna consciousness increases. Otherwise, after a certain point, they start developing doubts about who they are. But by sharing Krishna consciousness with others, their faith increases. You know, when people sit and they clap, it builds that self confidence in children that, see, I'm proud to be a devotee. And so by developing that faith, we become, very good. And also when we do programs and they are allowed to say a few words, initially they watch you and they help you in your preaching. And gradually as they observe, they are able to actually do it one day on their own. So again, we are helping them because so many children, they want that leadership role. I remember when we were going to a high school, that was the first time my children were to speak themselves. You know, my husband and I were doing mainly the speaking, but that was their first time, and it was, it was a real learning experience for my sons. And so we realized, and at one time we were doing this yearly in this Christian school, a Catholic school actually. They were very open. And I remember one time I suggested to her that there's a visiting devotee who's very, very good and senior, and he can do the session, the program instead of my children. And she was adamant. He says,
Mm.
what I like about your religion is the way that your youth, how they can present the philosophy in a way that we can learn from. So just to make that point, how important it is for our children to actually develop that confidence in Krishna consciousness by being out there and by giving them the opportunities to present it in many, and one can find many, many creative ways to do it. There's not just one way. There's so many ways to do that.
Yes, so it's so good. Such a good reminder for me as well. Our children have been learning the Krishna conscious principles as long as we have been. As long as we've been reading Srila Prabhupada's books and learning these principles, it's like they have been part of this journey with us. And it's just, I'm just wondering if you all can see me because my computer's having issues right now. Arita Mataji, are you able to see me or is it frozen?
No, I mean, I can just see, yeah, it's not live. You're not live there, but I can, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
frozen. It is what it is. Somehow or another, the technology is giving us some issues, but you can hear what I'm saying?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
wonderful. And so just again, for everybody, we're here at the ISKCON GPC Strategic Planning Team page, and we're speaking to Aruna Mataji, and unfortunately I'm having some technical issues, but she's not having technical issues, and so that
Oh, I can't hear you again, Gopi Gita. It's can't hear you anymore.
Hare Krishna, Aruda Mataji.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, so we have 15 minutes left, and I'm going to forget about trying to fix my problems. And I think it would be helpful at this point, and I do, apologize sincerely for these issues that have arisen. But at this point, we have so many questions that are coming in by our viewers have stayed strong. Thank you for not leaving through these technical issues. And we have quite a few questions that are coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and put those questions on the screen so that you can read them. Here we have Gokula Taruni Mataji saying, Hare Krishna Mataji pranams. How did you manage your housework? By chanting and also spending quality time with your children as you did your homeschooling.
It was a challenge. I mean, there's nothing in this life which comes without a challenge. I noticed that I remember that when my children were going to school, I was also very challenged. I mean, I was always making so many trips back and forth to school, trying to, give them, if there was a birthday and there was, to make some cookies for them so they could distribute cookies, and going back and forth so many times. I felt like this struggle when they were at home, they were a lot less. I was more relaxed, and yes, I was spending a lot of time with them. But then also, I was able to spend time chanting while the children would do something else. It's not like the children need attention every moment of the day, right? And of course, there were a lot of challenges in terms of household work. And I started doing things, small things, but they were very important, where I would try to make my household life more efficient, trying to redesign my kitchen so I could spend less time there, more time with them, and things like that. And I think Krishna gives us the intelligence how we can, if we are very convinced with what we want in life and determined, then I think Krishna helps in many different ways. But definitely, I can say that it wasn't without challenges. And there were many, many times when I was very, very, frustrated and challenged. Haribol, I think we're disconnected again, Gopi Gita. If everybody out there can hear me, I'll just speak a little bit more on this topic. The whole point is that life is going to bring its challenges, but the reward that one experiences through seeing your children, how when you see the progress of your children, it's very, very rewarding. I remember that I was a new devotee and I was advancing. Also, I was making spiritual advancement along with them. In other words, my journey was not also was started from a neophyte devotee into learning about Krishna consciousness, learning Shastra along with them. So we should not think that we need to be very experienced as a devotee in order to teach our children. We actually learn with them. And in this way, we are able to actually, it becomes a very enjoyable experience. The whole homeschooling becomes a very enjoyable experience for all of us. Hare Krishna. So the study of Srimad Bhagavatam became very beneficial for us in terms of their spiritual benefits that I saw in them, how they were advancing in terms of inculcating qualities that we want to see in our children. It was also very powerful because the Srimad Bhagavatam tells us, teaches us through examples. It teaches us through contrast, how we see in every story, we see both sides of the picture. We see exalted devotees like Prahlad Maharaj, but we also see, people like Hiranyakashipu who are on the other side of the spectrum. So children are able to gather, okay, well, they're able to see this material world, understand this material world through, through the spiritual perspective. And that's the greatest benefit I see about studying Srimad Bhagavatam, is to understand the nature of this material world with a spiritual perspective. Yes, and it's very, very valuable for children to understand what's going on there. And so it's such a wonderful way to learn about the nature of the material world, and rather than letting them experience on their own, where they learn through shastras, through the process of Shruti, they understand what is out there, but also they understand, also they develop the confidence about, of living in a world like that, and develop compassion as well as hope for their own lives. And the Srimad Bhagavatam clearly gives that. And so in this way, the spiritual benefits are so easy to inculcate in our children through the reading of Srimad Bhagavatam. Qualities such as humility, tolerance, self-control are easily taught through these stories, right? I remember going to a convent, in my early days for school, and we had a moral science class. And every day that was the first class that we did in the moral science class. And I remember learning those 10 commandments and how, I would hear, all the children would hear, but then it would go off the other ear, right? But learning these same principles through Srimad Bhagavatam goes really, really deep. The quality of gratefulness, like we see in the story of Dhruv Maharaj, the quality of humility that we see in the story of Maharaj Parikshit, and the qualities of, self-control, like we see in the story of Prahlad, how he was able to control, the atrocities of his father, but his father could not control his anger, and he was ready to kill his son. So the children developed, Prabhupada wanted our children. He said our children can adopt any varna, or any, whether they want to be teachers or administrators or farmers or businessmen, or work under an employer. What's very important is to develop good qualities. He wanted our children to not only be good devotees and to give Krishna to others, but he also wanted them to become leaders in society. And he said that unless one develops good qualities, good character, one cannot be a good leader. Right? We see in the story of all these great kings, Yudhishthira Maharaj, they were great unalloyed devotees of the Lord, but yet they were such powerful personalities, such powerful leaders, who could control the entire planet. Right? So Prabhupada's vision for our children was very, very big, very vast. He wanted our children to be exemplary Vaishnavas. And he said that if we raise children like that, that will be the glory of our movement, but also the glory of our country as well. So Prabhupada gave us a formula which can incorporate everything, which is good for not only for the children, for us, but for the entire society at large, for the entire world at large. And if we just follow what Prabhupada said, then everything academic or material will come. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. In terms of academics, it's also very powerful. The study of Srimad Bhagavatam manages to give our children everything that they need in life. As Prabhupada says in one of the quotes, that the study of Bhagavatam gives children master's education. It gives them master's level education, PhD level education. Their language abilities really become very, very vast. In my own humble experience, it just so happened that my children went to college early. We were running a restaurant, and somebody came and mentioned, they noticed how vocabulary was very good. So they said, why don't you let them take a class under the dual enrollment policy in college? And I said, okay, well, this seems very early, and I was very nervous. But somehow or the other, it worked, and we went to talk to the dean, and he allowed to let them experiment with one class, and that was an English class, an English literature class. And when Radhika Raman went to that class, he hadn't studied any other author or any books, and they were studying Shakespeare. But it wasn't a problem for him. Why? Because the study of Bhagavatam made him, his thinking, his critical thinking, and his logic and his reasoning became very, very deep. He was able to ascertain the finer issues. He was able to go into some problem and dig out the finer aspects of that problem. And the teacher actually noticed that, and she was quite amazed, where all the other children were trying to talk about the plot, the storyline. He was going in deeper to understand what was Shakespeare trying to say, what was the his his motive, his deeper ideas. So in this way we could see, and then of course they were taking subjects like sociology, anthropology, history, and they hadn't studied those subjects ever. But you see, the study, like Prabhupada said, the study of Bhagavatam gives everyone everything, all types of knowledge in every subject matter of the world. So the study of Bhagavatam proved to be very successful, even in the situation of academics, so that they were able to go to college without any problem, score high marks, and they were able to go to be successful as well. So in this way, I request everyone to take up this study with their children. Even if your children are going to school, no matter what they may be doing, it's important that they study Srimad Bhagavatam with your children, and and it will mitigate the effects of materialistic education. So whether you can do it once a week, twice a week, or more than that, that would be wonderful. So in this way, children will get the benefit of a spiritual education and the faith that they need to develop in spiritual life that works for them. Hare Krishna. I think I will stop here. I'm not sure whether I'm connected here or not. Hare Krishna, everyone.